You mentioned that hospital in Leeds, though, where this is already happening, but that trust also has a deficit of £100 million. And that trust in Leeds is having to make cuts already. And that's happening in quite a lot of places in the NHS. There's another hospital in Essex, not far from your constituency, where they're looking at cutting clinical roles. Now, if you become Health Secretary, would you tell trusts not to get rid of doctors and nurses?
Of course we don't want to see people getting rid of doctors and nurses, and you underline just how big the challenge is going to be if we win the next general election, because the NHS isn't just on its knees, it's on its face. And that's why, in terms of the approach I've set out, firstly, I've been incredibly candid about the state of the NHS, no dewy-eyed nostalgia and, you know, harking back to the past and resting on our laurels, but being honest about the state of the NHS today. Secondly, making it clear that Labour will invest in the NHS, but we also need to reform the NHS to make sure it works more effectively, because just this week we saw a pretty damning report on NHS productivity, and this government spends money in the wrong ways, in the wrong places, with worse outcomes, and that's got to change.
But those are principal things that you believe in, but there are already trusts having to get rid of staff. Now, if you're saying, well, you'll put more money in this end, or you'll increase the number of appointments over here, would you also say to trusts, stop getting rid of staff? And if so, would you give them more money so they don't have to get rid of staff?
Well, of course we don't want to see trusts getting rid of NHS staff.
So will you give them more money?
And we're going to have to work together to make sure that we're not being penny wise and pound foolish. But this is why we need a serious 10-year plan for the modernisation of the NHS, so we don't go through these repetitive cycles of year after year, crisis after crisis. And I'm afraid that's where we are after 14 years of Conservative government. So I can't promise to come in and wave a Labour magic wand on day one and all the problems go away. What I can promise is that we've got the right focus on investment and reform to do what the last Labour government did, which is deliver the shortest waiting times and the highest patient satisfaction ever.
But would you tell trusts and tell our viewers that you would tell hospitals to say, do not get rid of clinical staff?
Well, of course they shouldn't be getting rid of clinical staff, and we're going to have to work together to deal with the challenge that's been inflicted on the NHS by 14 years of catastrophic.
But would you tell them not to? Because
government.
Right now, hospitals around the country, and we're talking about the NHS in England, are being told they have to focus on their deficits. They have to focus on getting costs down. Would you reverse that? Well,
we do have to get costs under control in the NHS. We don't want to see cuts to clinical roles on the front line. We are going to have to work seriously together to get the NHS from where it is today, worst crisis in its history, to where we want it to be, which is delivering the same kinds of standards of care that it did under the last Labour government, when we delivered the shortest waiting times and the highest patient satisfaction ever.